What would you do if the only way to save your bloodline was to walk down the aisle with a monster, wearing a dress worth $1 million and a vial of untraceable poison hidden in your silk sleeve? Tonight's story isn't a fairy tale. It's an infamous, whispered legend from the dark underbelly of the Northside syndicates. It's the story of a desperate bride, a ruthless syndicate boss, and a wedding toast that was supposed to end in a funeral. But in the Mafia, secrets have a pulse of their own. If you think you know how this deadly honeymoon ends, think again. In the insular, heavily guarded world of the Five Families, the name Dominic Salvatore was spoken only in hushed, reverent tones. At 32, Dominic was the undisputed head of the Salvatore Syndicate, a man who had consolidated power along the eastern seaboard, not with loud, chaotic violence, but with terrifying, surgical precision. He owned the shipping lanes in Red Hook, controlled the offshore accounts in the Caymans, and held the politicians of New York in his tailored pockets. And today, he was buying a wife. Her name was Camille Bianchi. Standing in the vestibule of St. Patrick's Cathedral, hidden from the paparazzi and the federal agents parked across the street, Camille felt entirely numb. Her wedding dress, a custom creation of heavy Duchess satin and intricate Venetian lace, felt less like a garment and more like a beautifully tailored shroud. She stared at her reflection in the gilded antique mirror held by her anxious maid of honor, tracing the hollows of her cheekbones. She looked like a ghost. Perhaps, by tomorrow morning, she would be one. It's time. Cam, her older brother, Leo, whispered. Stepping into the dim vestibule, Camille slowly turned her gaze to him. Leo looked immaculate in his Tom Ford tuxedo, but the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead and the trembling of his hands betrayed him. It was Leo's fault she was in this dress. Since their father, Silvio Bianchi, was gunned down outside a restaurant in Little Italy 18 months ago, Leo had taken the reins of the Bianchi family. But Leo was not a boss. He was a gambler with a penchant for high-stakes losses and terrible alliances. He had racked up a staggering $12 million debt to Roman Petrov, a ruthless player in the Russian Bratva, who had been trying to dethrone the Salvatores for a decade. When Roman called in the debt, he gave Leo two options: be dismembered and mailed to his mother in pieces, or offer up his beautiful, fiercely intelligent sister to Dominic Salvatore. The Salvatores and the Bianchis had a generations-old rivalry. Roman knew that an alliance between the two would normally be impossible, but he also knew Dominic Salvatore had a strange, unexplained fixation on Camille, having watched her from afar at various underworld galas. Roman's plan was simple and insidious. Leo would offer Camille to Dominic to forge a peace treaty and unite the Italian families. But secretly, Camille was to assassinate Dominic on their wedding night. Once Dominic was dead, the Salvatore Empire would fracture, Roman would sweep in to take the territory, and Leo's debt would be erased. "Are you holding up?" Leo asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Don't pretend you care about my nerves, Leo," Camille said, her voice devoid of emotion. She adjusted the long, sheer sleeve of her gown. Hidden securely against her left forearm, held in place by a discreet band of medical tape, was a tiny glass ampule. Inside was a concentrated, highly refined extract of Aconitum napellus wolfsbane. Sourced from a black market toxicologist in Berlin, the clear, odorless liquid induced a massive, untraceable cardiac arrest within 5 minutes of ingestion. It would look exactly like a stress-induced heart attack. "I had no choice, Cam," Leo hissed, glancing around to ensure the Salvatore guards weren't listening. "It was this, or we both die." Roman wasn't bluffing. Just remember the plan. Tonight, before he touches you, you pour the drinks. You walk away free. Camille didn't answer. She simply took her brother's arm as the heavy wooden doors of the cathedral groaned open. The interior of St. Patrick's was a sea of dangerous men in expensive suits, and women draped in diamonds bought with blood money. The air was thick with the scent of white lilies, burning incense, and the underlying, metallic tension of a room filled with rival capos, forced to sit under one roof. At the end of the long velvet-carpeted aisle stood Dominic Salvatore. He was an imposing figure, easily standing 6'3", radiating an aura of quiet, lethal authority. His dark hair was immaculately styled, his jawline sharp, and his dark eyes locked onto Camille the moment she stepped into the light. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a terrifying, possessive intensity. As she walked toward him, every step felt like a march to the gallows. She felt the weight of the vial against her skin. Just a few drops. She repeated to herself like a dark mantra. Just a few drops, and I am free. When she finally reached the altar, Leo practically shoved her hand into Dominic's. Dominic's grip was firm, his skin warm against her icy fingers. He didn't look at Leo. His eyes never left Camille's face. "You look," Dominic murmured, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down her spine, exactly as I envisioned. The ceremony was a blur of Latin phrases and hypocritical blessings. When it came time for the vows, Camille forced the words past the lump in her throat, promising to love, honor, and obey a man she was actively planning to murder. Dominic slid a massive, flawless emerald-cut diamond onto her finger. It felt as heavy as a shackle. "I pronounce you husband and wife," the Archbishop declared, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. Dominic didn't wait for permission to kiss the bride. He pulled her flush against his chest. She caught the scent of him expensive vetiver, clean linen, and a faint hint of something dark and metallic, like gun oil. His lips were firm, dominating, sealing her fate in front of the 500 criminals who ruled the city. The trap was set. The blood vow was taken. Now, all that remained was the execution. The reception at the Plaza Hotel was a lavish display of power and excess, a $1 million masquerade of civility. But by midnight, the performance was over. The newlyweds were escorted out of the ballroom by a phalanx of heavily armed security, bundled into the back of a bulletproof Maybach, and driven out of the city. They weren't going to a hotel. Dominic had insisted on spending their wedding night at his private, heavily fortified estate in the Hamptons, a sprawling, glass and stone fortress perched on a cliff overlooking the churning Atlantic Ocean. The hour-long drive was suffocatingly silent. Rain began to lash against the tinted windows, mirroring the storm raging inside Camille's chest. Dominic sat next to her, giving her space, one hand resting casually on his knee, the other tapping a slow, rhythmic beat against the leather armrest. He seemed entirely at ease, a predator resting in its den. When they arrived at the estate, the gates swung open to reveal a massive courtyard flanked by armed guards. Dominic led her inside, dismissing the staff with a subtle flick of his wrist. The massive oak doors clicked shut, locking them in. The absolute isolation of the estate hit Camille like a physical blow. There was no one here. No Leo, no Roman Petrov, no police. Just her, the Mafia Boss, and the poison. "The master suite is upstairs," Dominic said, shrugging off his tailored tuxedo jacket and tossing it over a velvet armchair. He unfastened his bow tie, pulling it loose from his collar. "But I think we both need a drink before we face the rest of the night. It's been a long day, Mrs. Salvatore." Hearing her new name on his lips made her stomach turn. "A drink would be wonderful," she managed to say, her voice impressively steady. Dominic walked over to a massive, custom-built mahogany wet bar that occupied the far wall of the study. The room was lit only by the roaring fire in the stone hearth and a few dim amber lamps. The shadows danced across the walls, long and menacing. "I have a bottle of Macallan 25. I've been saving for a special occasion," Dominic said, turning his back to her to reach for the top shelf. "I believe tonight qualifies. This is it," Camille thought, her pulse suddenly roaring in her ears. "This is the window." She stepped closer to the bar, her heavy satin dress whispering across the hardwood floor. "Let me help," she said softly. Dominic pulled the heavy crystal decanter down and set 2 heavy-bottomed tumblers on the marble counter. I'm perfectly capable of pouring my own drinks, Camille. I know, she said, forcing a small, alluring smile as she stepped right beside him. But it's my duty as a wife to serve my husband, isn't it? Dominic paused, turning his head to look at her. His dark eyes searched her face, analyzing the micro-expressions, looking for a crack in her facade. For a terrifying second, Camille thought he saw right through her. But then, a slow, dark smirk spread across his face. Very well. Pour the drinks. Neat. He stepped back, turning away from her to walk over to the fireplace. He leaned against the stone mantel, rolling his broad shoulders, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Camille's hands were shaking so violently. She was terrified. The crystal would chime against the glass, betraying her. She took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing her muscles into absolute stillness. She uncorked the Macallan, the rich, peaty aroma filling the space between them. She poured 2 generous measures of the amber liquid into the tumblers. Then, she moved with practiced, desperate speed. With her right hand, she reached across her body to adjust her left sleeve. Her fingers found the medical tape, peeling it back just enough to free the tiny glass ampule. She palmed it expertly, snapping the fragile glass tip with her thumbnail. The tiny click sounded like a gunshot to her own ears, but the crackle of the fireplace masked the noise. She hovered her hand over the glass meant for Dominic. 1, 2, 3 drops of the clear aconite extract fell into the expensive whiskey, dissolving instantly, leaving absolutely no trace. She slipped the empty ampule deep into the pocket, hidden within the folds of her skirt. Her heart was beating so fast, it physically hurt. It was done. The mechanism of his death was in the glass. All she had to do was hand it to him. Your drink, Dominic, she said, picking up both glasses. She walked over to the fireplace, holding out the poisoned tumbler toward him. Dominic turned around. He looked at the glass in her hand, then up into her eyes. He reached out, his large, calloused fingers brushing against hers as he took the tumbler. The contact sent an electric shock through her system. To us, Camille said, raising her own unpoisoned glass, desperate to hurry the process. To a long, prosperous union. Dominic didn't raise his glass. He stood perfectly still, the firelight catching the amber liquid, casting a warm, deceptive glow over the deadly concoction inside. A long union, Dominic repeated slowly, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a chilling, gravelly tone. That's a beautiful sentiment, Camille. Truly. He swirled the liquid in the glass, the ice-free liquor coating the sides of the crystal. You know, my father used to tell me that a man's greatest vulnerability is the woman he lets into his house. He said the moment you let your guard down, the moment you trust someone enough to drink what they pour, is the moment you sign your own death warrant. Camille forced herself to laugh. A breathy, nervous sound. Your father sounds like a paranoid man. He was. Dominic agreed softly. And he lived to be 82 because of it. Dominic brought the rim of the glass to his lips. Camille held her breath. Drink it, she screamed internally. Just drink it. The liquid touched his lower lip. And then he stopped. The silence in the room stretched until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on Camille's chest. Dominic lowered the glass, mere millimeters from his mouth, and let out a long, slow exhale. I must admit, Dominic said, his eyes locking onto hers with terrifying clarity. You have exceptional composure. Your hand barely shook when you snapped the glass vial. Aconite, wasn't it? Or something synthesized. Roman Petrov always did prefer the quiet, untraceable methods. Camille's blood ran cold. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath her. Her lungs seized, completely forgetting how to draw air. Before she could process his words, before her brain could even send the signal to her legs to run, Dominic lunged. He moved, with the speed of a striking viper. The crystal tumbler in his right hand shattered against the stone hearth. The poisoned Macallan instantly sizzling and vaporizing against the hot bricks. In the same fluid motion, his left hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around her left wrist like a steel vice. Camille gasped in pain as he twisted her arm sharply, yanking her forward until her chest slammed against his solid frame. The unpoisoned drink in her hand spilled across the floor as the glass slipped from her numb fingers. "You thought I wouldn't know?" Dominic whispered, leaning down until his lips were inches from her ear. His voice wasn't a roar of anger. It was a deadly, quiet hiss that was infinitely more terrifying. "You thought you could walk into my house, drink my whiskey, and put me in the ground on my own wedding night. I don't know what you're talking about," Camille choked out, thrashing against his grip. But it was useless. He held her wrist with crushing force, lifting her arm just enough to expose the sticky residue of the medical tape and the red mark where the ampule had rested. "Don't insult my intelligence, Camille," Dominic growled, his grip tightening until she whimpered. "I know everything. I know about Leo's $12 million debt to the Bratva. I know about Roman's little ultimatum. And I know about the poison you smuggled into St. Patrick's Cathedral." "How?" The words slipped out of her trembling lips before she could stop it. The facade was shattered. The game was over. Dominic scoffed, a dark, humorless sound. He released her wrist, only to instantly slide his large hands around her waist, pinning her back against the heavy mahogany desk. There was nowhere to run. "Your brother," Dominic said simply. Camille stared at him, the world spinning. "Leo? You think Leo is a loyal soldier?" Dominic mocked, leaning his weight against her, trapping her entirely. "Leo is a rat drowning in a sinking ship. Roman Petrov promised him a clean slate if you killed me. But Leo isn't just a coward. He's greedy. 2 days ago, Leo came crawling to my office in Red Hook. He told me the entire plan." "No," Camille whispered, hot tears of absolute betrayal finally spilling over her lashes. "No, he wouldn't. He told me it was the only way to save us, to save my mother. He told me the plan," Dominic continued relentlessly, his eyes dark and merciless, "because he wanted me to buy his debt from Roman. He figured if he sold you out to me, I'd execute you for the assassination attempt, wipe out his debt as a favor, and let him walk away with the Bianchi territory untouched." Camille felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. Her own brother, the man she had sacrificed her freedom for, the man she had become a murderer for, had handed her over to the executioner just to hedge his bets. She slumped against the desk, all the fight draining out of her. "So do it," she whispered, closing her eyes, tears tracking through her expensive makeup. "You have every right. Kill me. Get it over with." She waited for the gun to be drawn, or for his hands to move from her waist to her throat. She waited for the end. Instead, Dominic reached up, his thumb brushing away a tear that had fallen to her cheek. The touch was startlingly gentle, a violent contrast to the man who had just crushed her wrist. "Kill you?" Dominic murmured, leaning in so close she could feel the heat of his breath on her skin. "Why would I destroy the only valuable thing the Bianchi family has left?" Camille opened her eyes, staring at him in utter confusion. "I didn't buy your brother's debt," Dominic stated, his voice taking on a strange, fierce possessiveness. "I bought you. I let Leo walk into the trap. I let Roman think his plan was working. Because as long as Roman thought you were going to kill me, he wouldn't touch you. And as long as you thought you were saving your brother, you wouldn't run away before the vows were spoken." He stepped back slightly, though his hands remained firmly on her hips, keeping her anchored to the desk. "You are my wife now, Camille. In the eyes of God, the law, and the commission, the Bianchis are under my absolute protection. Roman Petrov is a dead man walking my men, are taking out his lieutenants as we speak. And your brother." Dominic's eyes flashed with cold malice. "Your brother is currently locked in the trunk of a car at the bottom of the East River." Camille gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. He sold his own flesh and blood to two different devils, Dominic said coldly. He paid the price. Dominic stepped back entirely, straightening his cuffs, the monstrous apex predator once again looking like a polished gentleman. He looked down at his new bride, trembling against the mahogany desk in her $1 million dress. "You played your part beautifully tonight, Camille," Dominic said, walking toward the bedroom doors. He paused, turning back to look at her, his expression unreadable. "But the Game of Thrones is over. You tried to poison me, and I forgave you because you were manipulated. But understand this, there is no escape from this house. There is no escape from this marriage." He pushed the heavy double doors open, the massive four-poster bed visible in the dim light of the master suite. "Your old life is dead," Dominic Salvatore said, his voice echoing with absolute, terrifying finality. "Now, you stay. Forever." The morning sun over the Atlantic Ocean was mercilessly bright, piercing the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master suite on Meadow Lane. Camille awoke to the rhythmic crashing sound of the waves, a stark contrast to the absolute silence inside the Hamptons estate. For a fleeting, merciful second, her mind was a blank slate. Then, the memories of the previous night crashed over her with the force of a physical blow. The cathedral, the poison, the crushing grip of Dominic's hand, and the chilling revelation of her brother's watery grave. She sat up sharply, her breath hitching. She was alone in the massive California king bed, the heavy, bespoke fretted linens tangled around her legs. She was no longer wearing her $1 million wedding gown. Someone Dominic, or perhaps a female staff member sworn to secrecy, had undressed her and slipped her into a sheer ivory silk nightgown. The realization made her skin crawl with a mixture of violation and profound vulnerability. On the polished ebony nightstand beside her lay a small, velvet box. Resting next to it was a sleek, stainless steel Cartier Panthère watch. A note, written in sharp, elegant cursive on heavy cardstock, was propped against a crystal water carafe. "Time is a luxury you now have in abundance. Breakfast is at 9. Do not make me wait. D." Camille threw the covers off, her bare feet hitting the heated Persian rug. She paced the length of the room, her mind racing. She was a prisoner, a bride bound to the deadliest man in New York. She walked to the windows, looking down at the sprawling manicured lawns that rolled toward the private beach. The perimeter was heavily fortified. She could see men in dark windbreakers patrolling the seawall, earpieces catching the morning light. 2 black Cadillac Escalades were parked near the security gates. There was no slipping out the back door. This was a fortress designed to keep heavily armed cartels out, which meant it was equally effective at keeping one unarmed woman in. Refusing to cower, Camille marched into the adjoining master bathroom, a cavernous space of Calacatta marble and brushed gold fixtures. She showered quickly, scrubbing her skin until it was flushed red, trying to wash away the scent of Dominic's expensive vetiver cologne that seemed to linger in the air. She found the walk-in closet stocked meticulously with designer clothing in her exact measurements. Prada cashmere sweaters, tailored Acris trousers, rows of Louboutin heels. It was a terrifying testament to how long Dominic had been planning this acquisition. She chose a stark black turtleneck and dark trousers mourning clothes. Whether she was mourning her deceitful brother, her lost freedom, or the death of her own innocence, she wasn't entirely sure. When she descended the grand, sweeping staircase, the scent of fresh espresso and toasted brioche wafted from the dining room. Dominic sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, engrossed in a copy of the Wall Street Journal. He wore a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, sans tie, the top 2 buttons of his crisp white shirt undone. He looked entirely undisturbed, like a corporate CEO reading the morning stocks, rather than a syndicate boss who had orchestrated multiple murders hours prior. "You're late," he noted, not looking up from the paper as she entered. "I was busy adjusting to my new reality as a hostage," Camille replied coldly, pulling out a chair at the opposite end of the table. It takes a moment to find the right outfit for captivity. Dominic slowly folded the newspaper, placing it next to his espresso cup. His dark eyes locked onto hers across the expanse of the table. The air in the room instantly grew heavy, thick with the unyielding tension that defined their new existence. "You are not a hostage, Camille," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You are my wife, the Donna of the Salvatore family. A hostage is bound and gagged in a basement. You are sitting in a $50 million estate eating imported caviar. A cage is a cage, Dominic, even if the bars are made of gold." She shot back, gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. "You killed my brother. Your brother tried to kill me, sold you to the Bratva, and then tried to sell you to me," Dominic corrected smoothly, picking up a silver knife to butter a piece of toast. "I did the world, and you, a profound favor. You should be thanking me. Thanking you." She scoffed, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping her throat. "You expect gratitude. You orchestrated this entire nightmare. You knew the poison was coming. You watched me walk down the aisle, knowing Leo was already dead or dying. You are a monster." Dominic didn't flinch. He set the knife down, steepling his fingers under his chin. "Yes, I am. And you, my beautiful, treacherous bride, were fully prepared to become a murderer, to save a coward. It seems we are a perfect match." He stood up, his towering frame dominating the space, and walked slowly down the length of the table toward her. Camille forced herself not to shrink back into her chair. When he reached her, he placed his large hands on the arms of her chair. Leaning in so close, she could see the flecks of gold in his obsidian eyes. "Understand the rules of this new life, Camille," he murmured, his tone devoid of anger, but brimming with absolute authority. "Inside this house, you may hate me, you may curse my name, you may throw expensive crystal at my head if it makes you feel better, but outside these walls, to the 5 families, to the feds, and to the remaining Bratva loyalists, we are an impenetrable front. You will smile, you will wear my ring, you will be the fierce, untouchable queen of this syndicate, because if you show even a fraction of weakness, they will not hesitate to tear you apart, to get to me. And if I refuse?" She challenged, her voice trembling slightly despite her bravado. "What will you do? Kill me, too?" Dominic reached out, his knuckles lightly brushing against her cheek. The gentleness of the touch was jarring, a stark contradiction to his lethal words. "I already told you, I don't destroy my own property, but I can make your life exceptionally uncomfortable. Do we have an understanding?" Camille swallowed the lump of pride lodged in her throat. She looked into his eyes, searching for a bluff, but found only cold, hard certainty. "Yes," she whispered. "Good," Dominic said, straightening up and buttoning his suit jacket. "Eat your breakfast. Silas will be your personal shadow from now on. We return to Manhattan tomorrow. The honeymoon is over, Mrs. Salvatore. Now, the real war begins." 3 weeks passed. The transition from the isolated cliffs of the Hamptons to the towering, glass-walled Salvatore penthouse in Tribeca did nothing to ease Camille's sense of confinement. If anything, being back in the city only amplified the suffocating reality of her situation. She was surrounded by millions of people, yet entirely cut off from the world. Silas, a massive, silent enforcer with a scar dissecting his left eyebrow, was a permanent fixture 3 paces behind her. The criminal underworld was in chaos. Dominic's surgical strike on Roman Petrov's inner circle had crippled the Russian syndicate, but it hadn't destroyed them. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the Bratva was rapidly reorganizing under the command of Roman's volatile cousin, Viktor Sokolov. Dominic was rarely home. He was busy securing his control over the Port Newark Elizabeth Marine Terminal, aggressively choking out the Russians' remaining supply lines. The penthouse became a high-tech war room, filled with thick cigar smoke and the hushed, urgent voices of Salvatore capos coming and going at all hours. Camille existed on the periphery of this violence, a ghost haunting her own lavish home. But she was not idle. Surviving in the Bianchi family had taught her to be observant. She watched the capos, learned their faces, and mapped the shifting alliances from the snippets of conversation she overheard. She learned that Viktor Sokolov was demanding blood for Roman's death, and that he had put a $10 million bounty on Dominic's head. And, more terrifyingly, a $5 million bounty on hers. One Tuesday afternoon, while Dominic was allegedly attending a sit-down at a secure location in Brooklyn, Camille found herself alone on the top floor of the penthouse. The heavy oak doors to Dominic's private study, a room explicitly off-limits to everyone, including her, were left ajar by a careless cleaner. The temptation was overwhelming. Glancing down the hallway to ensure Silas was stationed by the elevators, Camille slipped into the study, softly clicking the door shut behind her. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and Dominic's signature cologne. It was meticulously organized. She moved swiftly to the massive mahogany desk, her fingers trembling as she booted up his monitor, but it required a biometric scan. Thwarted, she turned her attention to the physical files locked in the lateral cabinets behind the desk. Most were secured, but the bottom drawer yielded to a hard tug. Inside, nestled between property deeds and offshore account ledgers, was a thick, unmarked manila folder. Camille pulled it out, resting it on the desk. She opened it, expecting to find shipping manifests or hit lists. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. It was a dossier, on hair. Her hands shook as she flipped through the contents. There were dozens of surveillance photographs. Camille walking out of a bakery in Soho 3 years ago. Camille attending a charity gala at the Pierre Hotel. Camille standing at her father's grave. The dates on the photos stretched back 5 long years. Long before her father was murdered. Long before Leo's gambling debts spiraled out of control. But it wasn't just photos. There were transcripts of intercepted phone calls, medical records, and detailed background checks on everyone she had ever dated or befriended. Dominic hadn't just bought her. He had been stalking her, studying her, obsessing over her from the shadows for half a decade. Disgust and terror warred in her chest. She turned to the back of the file, where a smaller, sealed envelope was taped to the cardboard. She ripped it open. Inside was a single, heavily redacted police report and a private investigator's summary regarding the night her father, Silvio Bianchi, was gunned down. She read the summary once, then twice. The words blurred together as the blood rushed from her head. The hit on her father hadn't been a random act of violence or a Salvatore strike, as the streets had always whispered. The wiretap transcripts attached to the report proved it. The order had come from Roman Petrov, and the man who had fed Roman her father's exact location outside that restaurant in Little Italy. It was Leo. Leo had sold their father out to the Russians to clear his first major gambling debt. Roman had then used that leverage to keep Leo on a tight leash, eventually forcing the marriage ultimatum to destroy the Salvatores. Looking for something? Camille violently jumped, spinning around. Dominic stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the hallway light. Silas was visible just behind him, looking nervously at the floor. Dominic dismissed the bodyguard with a curt nod and stepped into the study, closing the heavy doors with a resonant thud. He didn't look angry. He looked exhausted. He walked slowly toward the desk, his eyes dropping to the scattered photos, and the police report in her trembling hands. "You've been watching me for 5 years," Camille whispered, her voice cracking, completely ignoring the revelation about her father for a moment, blinded by the sheer violation of her privacy. "You are a psychopath. I am a man who protects his interests," Dominic replied evenly, stopping on the opposite side of the desk. "I saw you at the Columbus Citizens Foundation gala 5 years ago. You were furious with your father, arguing with him in the coat check because he refused to let you go to law school. You were fiery, intelligent, entirely wasted on the Bianchi family. So you stalked me? I kept you safe," Dominic corrected, his voice hardening. "Do you have any idea how many times Roman Petrov's men tried to grab you off the street, to use as leverage against your father. My men intercepted 3 separate kidnapping attempts over the years. You never even knew. Camille looked down at the paper detailing her father's assassination. And this? Did you know Leo killed my father? Dominic's expression softened, a rare flicker of genuine empathy crossing his hardened features. I found out a week after Silvio was buried. By the time I put the pieces together, Leo was already in Roman's pocket. Why didn't you tell me? Tears of profound betrayal. An entirely new grief for a father she loved, and a brother she thought she knew, spilled hot tracks down her cheeks. Why let me hate you? Why let me think you were the villain? Because, Dominic said softly, walking around the desk to stand directly in front of her. If I had told you your own brother orchestrated your father's murder, it would have broken you. You would have confronted him. Leo would have panicked and killed you too. Letting you hate me was the tactical choice. It kept you alive. It kept you focused on surviving. He reached out, and this time, Camille didn't flinch away. She let him wipe the tear from her jawline. I bought you to save you from a family that viewed you as collateral damage, Dominic murmured, his thumb resting against her pulse point, feeling the frantic, hummingbird beat of her heart. I am a monster, Camille. I have done unspeakable things to build this empire, but I will burn this entire city to ash before I let anyone hurt you again. That is my vow. The dynamic in the room shifted, the tectonic plates of their relationship grinding into a new, terrifying alignment. The golden cage suddenly felt less like a prison and more like a fortress holding back a tide of monsters, far worse than the man standing before her. The invitation to the charity masquerade at Cipriani Wall Street was not optional. It was a highly publicized, neutral ground event hosted by a corrupt state senator who kept half the syndicates in New York out of federal prison. Dominic's attendance, with his new bride on his arm, was required to project absolute strength and unity to the commission. They needed to see that the Salvatore Bianchi alliance was unbreakable and that Roman Petrov's death had not destabilized the city's power structure. Camille stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the penthouse, adjusting the bodice of her breathtaking Oscar de la Renta gown. It was deep, blood-red silk, featuring a daring sweetheart neckline and a high slit up the thigh, a dress designed to command attention and radiate power. A diamond choker, dripping with rare rubies, encircled her throat. She looked like mafia royalty. She felt like a target. Dominic stepped up behind her reflection. He was wearing a classic black tuxedo, his dark hair slicked back, a silver masquerade mask resting in his hands. He looked devastatingly handsome and incredibly dangerous. "You are perfection," he murmured, his hands settling on her bare shoulders, his thumbs tracing the line of her collarbone. "I feel like bait," Camille replied honestly, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "You are," Dominic said, without hesitation, a dark smirk playing on his lips. "Viktor Sokolov is desperate. He's bleeding territory and losing the respect of his men. He needs a grand gesture to secure his position as the new head of the Bratva. Hitting us tonight, in public, would be his only move." Camille turned to face him, her heart thudding heavily against her ribs. "You knew he was going to attack, and you're bringing me anyway?" "I am bringing you because if you stay here, you are vulnerable. At Cipriani, I control the environment. Half the catering staff are my men. The valet is my crew. I need Victor to make his move, so I can cut the head off the snake permanently." He handed her a delicate, red-feathered Venetian mask. "Stay close to me tonight. Do exactly as I say." The grand ballroom of Cipriani Wall Street was a masterpiece of Greek Revival architecture, with its massive marble columns and towering 70-foot ceilings. The room was packed with politicians, socialites, and crime bosses hidden behind expensive masks and forced smiles. A string quartet played a haunting rendition of Vivaldi in the corner, the music floating over the clinking of champagne flutes. For 2 hours, Camille played the part of the perfect, enamored wife. She smiled at ruthless men, laughed at unfunny jokes from crooked judges, and kept her hand firmly tucked into the crook of Dominic's arm. Every time someone approached them, she felt the muscles in Dominic's forearm bunch and coil. A predator waiting for the trap to spring. The strike happened at exactly 11:15 p.m. during the senator's keynote toast. It didn't start with a gunshot. It started with the lights. The massive crystal chandeliers suspended from the vaulted ceilings suddenly flickered and died, plunging the vast, crowded room into absolute, chaotic darkness. Screams erupted instantly, bouncing off the marble columns. "Down!" Dominic roared. Before Camille could process the darkness, Dominic's heavy hand gripped the back of her neck, shoving her violently to the polished marble floor. The deafening crack, crack, crack of suppressed automatic weapon fire tore through the room, shattering the peaceful facade. Glass rained down from the bar. The heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor was masked by the sheer volume of panic. "Stay low! Crawl to the pillar!" Dominic barked over the chaos. Camille didn't hesitate. The heavy silk of her Oscar de la Renta gown snagged and tore as she scrambled on her hands and knees toward the massive stone column Dominic had indicated. The darkness was disorienting, lit only by the erratic, terrifying muzzle flashes of gunfire erupting near the kitchen entrances. Victor's men had bypassed the security checkpoints entirely, likely smuggled in through the service elevators. Dominic was right beside her, drawing a sleek, matte black Sig Sauer from a specialized shoulder holster hidden beneath his tuxedo jacket. He pulled her behind the cover of the marble pillar, his large body shielding hers. "Silas!" Dominic shouted into his cuff microphone, returning fire into the darkness with lethal, calculated precision. "Status!" They breached the loading dock. "Boss!" Silas's frantic voice crackled through the earpiece. "We're pinned in the west corridor. They brought heavy hitters. You need to exfil through the service tunnels, now." Another volley of bullets chipped the marble pillar, sending razor-sharp shrapnel flying into the air. Dominic grunted, a sharp hiss of pain escaping his lips as he ducked back into cover. "Dominic!" Camille gasped, her hands instinctively grabbing his arm. In the dim ambient light filtering through the high windows, she felt something warm and slick. Blood was rapidly blooming across the pristine white shoulder of his tuxedo shirt. He'd been hit. "It's a graze," he lied through gritted teeth, quickly ejecting the spent magazine and slamming a fresh one into his weapon. He turned to her, his breathing heavy. "Victor is here. I saw him near the east exit. He's trying to box us in." Dominic grabbed her by the shoulders, pulling her face close to his. "Listen to me very carefully. There is a service corridor 10 yards behind us. It leads directly to the subway access tunnels. I'm going to lay down suppressive fire. You run. Do not stop until you hit the street. My men are circling the block in a black Suburban. I am not leaving you here," Camille yelled over the sound of screaming guests and shattered glass. "Camille, do not argue with me," Dominic roared, his eyes flashing with a terrifying, desperate intensity. "If Victor gets his hands on you, he will make a spectacle of it. Run." He didn't give her a chance to respond. Dominic spun around the pillar, firing rapidly toward the approaching shadows. Camille hesitated. 10 yards. It was a short sprint. She could run. She could escape the darkness, escape the gunfire, escape the suffocating weight of the mafia life. This was her out. Dominic was wounded. He couldn't stop her. She turned toward the dark service corridor. But as she did, her foot kicked something heavy on the floor. She looked down. It was a Glock 19, dropped by one of Victor's dead sicarios, sprawled just a few feet away. She looked back at Dominic. He was pinned down, holding the line, bleeding out on the marble floor of Cipriani to buy her time to escape. He was a monster, yes, but he was her monster. He had protected her when her own blood had sold her to the wolves. Camille didn't run. With a surge of adrenaline that completely overrode her terror, Camille grabbed the heavy, unfamiliar weapon from the floor. It was heavier than she expected, cold and metallic. She gripped it with both hands, just as she had seen Dominic do. From the shadows to Dominic's blind side, A massive figure in tactical gear stepped out from behind a toppled catering table, raising an assault rifle, aiming directly at Dominic's exposed back. "Dominic!" Camille screamed. She didn't aim. She just pointed the heavy pistol at the shadow and pulled the trigger. The recoil was violent, sending a shockwave up her arms and throwing her backward. The gunshot echoed deafeningly in the enclosed space. The figure, in tactical gear, jerked violently, a spray of dark blood erupting from his neck. He crumpled to the floor instantly, his rifle clattering uselessly across the marble. Dominic whipped around, his gun trained on the falling body. Then his eyes snapped to Camille. She was sitting on the floor, the smoking Glock still clutched in her shaking hands. Her red silk dress, stained with marble dust, and the blood of the man she had just killed. For a fraction of a second, amidst the smoke, the screaming, and the dying, time stopped. Dominic stared at her, not with shock, but with a dark, blazing reverence. The terrified bride was gone. The queen of the Salvatore Syndicate had just drawn her first blood. He moved instantly, sliding across the floor to grab her arm, pulling her up. "Now we move!" he commanded, his voice ringing with a new, dangerous thrill. Together, the wounded king and his bloodied queen vanished into the shadows of the service corridor, leaving the chaos of the Bratva's failed ambush behind them. The war had escalated, but the terms of their marriage had forever changed. They were no longer captor and captive. They were partners in the dark. The service corridors beneath Cipriani plunged them into a damp, subterranean nightmare. The transition from the opulent, chandelier-lit ballroom to the grimy, rat-infested access tunnels of the MTA subway system was jarring. Camille ran, her lungs burning, the heavy Glock still clutched in her right hand, her left arm wrapped tightly around Dominic's waist to keep him moving. Dominic's breathing was ragged, his weight growing heavier against her with every step they took down the concrete incline toward the abandoned sections of the Broad Street station. The tuxedo shirt beneath his jacket was completely soaked in dark, hot blood. "Left," Dominic rasped, his voice tight with pain. "Take the maintenance stairwell. Silas is tracking our GPS." They stumbled through a rusted steel door, descending further into the darkness. The distant rumble of a J train passing overhead shook the dust from the concrete ceiling, masking the sound of their frantic footsteps. Camille's Oscar de la Renta gown, once a masterpiece of high fashion, was now a tattered, blood-soaked ruin, clinging to her legs. "You're losing too much blood," Camille said, panic finally beginning to pierce through her adrenaline-fueled focus. "I've survived worse," Dominic grunted, leaning heavily against the graffiti-covered wall as they reached the bottom of the stairs. He slid down until he was sitting on the filthy concrete, his head resting against the cinder block. He looked up at her, the dim emergency lighting casting harsh shadows over his sharp cheekbones. "You didn't run. Don't flatter yourself," Camille lied, kneeling beside him and tearing a long strip of silk from the ruined hem of her dress. She balled it up, pressing it violently against the entry wound just below his collarbone. "If I ran, Victor's men would have hunted me down just for the sport of it. I needed you alive." Dominic hissed as she applied pressure, but a dark, genuine smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Practical to the end, Mrs. Salvatore, but we both know that's a lie. I saw your eyes when you pulled the trigger. You didn't shoot him to save yourself. You shot him to protect what is yours." Camille felt a shudder run through her spine. She looked down at her hands, smeared with the bright crimson of Dominic's blood, and the darker, drying blood of the Bratva hitman she had killed. She had crossed an invisible line tonight. The girl who had walked into Street Patrick's Cathedral hoping to escape the Mafia was dead. She had killed a man. And worse, she felt absolutely no remorse. Before she could process the gravity of that realization, the screech of tires echoed down the access tunnel. 2 headlights cut through the darkness, blinding them. Silas leapt out of the black armored Suburban. Before it had even come to a full stop, his assault rifle raised. "Clear," Silas barked into his comms, rushing over to them. He took one look at Dominic's shoulder and cursed in Italian. "We need to get you to Costa. Now." They hauled Dominic into the back of the SUV. The drive to Bay Ridge was a blur of erratic swerving and red lights. They didn't go to a hospital. Hospitals asked questions. They pulled into an abandoned auto body shop, passing through a false wall that revealed a state-of-the-art, sterile underground trauma clinic, operated by a disgraced surgeon on the Salvatore payroll. Dr. Costa didn't ask questions. He immediately sedated Dominic and went to work, extracting the bullet fragment and repairing the torn muscle. Camille refused to wait in the hall. She stood in the corner of the glaringly bright surgical room, watching the monitors beep, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. Silas stood beside her, a hulking, silent sentinel. "He's going to be out of commission for at least 48 hours, Silas said quietly, not looking at her. The bullet missed the artery by a millimeter, but the blood loss is severe. The street is going to smell blood in the water. Victor Sokolov will claim he killed the King of New York." Camille stared at the rhythmic rise and fall of Dominic's chest. The syndicate boss, the terrifying apex predator, looked remarkably human, lying on a stainless steel table. But the empire he had built didn't pause for humanity. The 5 families would demand answers. The Salvatore capos would panic. Without Dominic's iron fist, the territory would fracture by sunrise. She remembered Dominic's words from the morning after their wedding. "You will be the fierce, untouchable queen of this syndicate." Camille turned to Silas, her posture straightening, the last vestiges of the frightened Bianchi girl evaporating into the sterile air. "Then we don't give them a chance to smell blood," Camille said, her voice dropping into a deadly, commanding cadence that made Silas turn his head sharply. "We give them a demonstration." Silas narrowed his eyes, assessing her. "With all due respect, Donna, you are not a soldier." "No," Camille agreed, stepping forward into the light, her ruined dress resembling a battle standard. "I am the architect. Call the capos. All of them. Tell them to convene at the Tribeca penthouse at 4:00 a.m. And Silas?" "Yes, ma'am. Find me a clean suit. We have a war to win." The tension in the Salvatore penthouse was thick enough to choke on. The heavy mahogany dining table, usually reserved for lavish dinners, was surrounded by 6 of the most dangerous men in New York, the capo regimes of the Salvatore family. The air was grey with cigar smoke and the bitter stench of fear. It was 4:30 a.m. Outside, the city was asleep, completely unaware of the shift in the underworld's tectonic plates. "This is a disaster," Lorenzo, an older capo who controlled the gambling rackets in Queens, slammed his fist on the table. "Dominic is MIA. Half of Cipriani is completely wrecked, and the feds are crawling all over Wall Street. Victor Sokolov just proved he can hit us anywhere." "So what do we do?" asked Matteo, a younger, more volatile lieutenant. "We hit the Russian bathhouses in Brighton Beach. We burn their fronts. We don't have the manpower right now." Lorenzo shot back. "Without Dominic giving the order, the other families won't back us. We should reach out to Victor, negotiate a ceasefire before we lose the docks entirely." "Negotiate?" The word cracked through the room like a whip. The heavy double doors of the dining room opened, and Camille walked in. She was no longer wearing the bloody remnants of her gown. She wore a sharply tailored, obsidian black Tom Ford suit, a crisp white silk blouse, and black stiletto pumps that clicked authoritatively against the hardwood floor. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant twist. Silas walked half a pace behind her, his hand resting on his holstered weapon, acting as her absolute muscle. The capos fell silent, staring at the 24-year-old bride of their incapacitated boss. "You want to negotiate with the man who just shot up a charity gala and put a $10 million bounty on your Don's head?" Camille asked, walking slowly to the head of the table, Dominic's chair. Lorenzo cleared his throat. trying to mask his discomfort with condescension. Mrs. Salvatore, with respect, this is syndicate business. You should be resting. Where is Dominic? Dominic is handling an off-the-books operation regarding the leaks that allowed Victor into the gala. Camille lied flawlessly, her eyes locking onto Lorenzo with a chilling, deadpan gaze. He has left me proxy command of the table until his return. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the men. Matteo scoffed. Proxy command? You're a Bianchi. You've been here 3 weeks. Camilla didn't blink. She reached into her suit jacket and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger, the very ledger she had stolen from Dominic's private safe. Before leaving the clinic, the one that tracked every illicit shipment, every bribe, and every weakness of their enemies. She dropped it heavily onto the table. It sounded like a judge's gavel. I am a Salvatore, Camille corrected softly, leaning her palms against the polished wood. And unlike you, Matteo, I have been doing my homework. Victor Sokolov is not a tactical genius. He is a desperate, impulsive dog who got lucky tonight. And dogs are easily trapped. She flipped the ledger open, tapping a manicured fingernail against a circled manifest. Victor has been funneling all his remaining heavy munitions through a single front. Global Horizon Freight, operating out of Warehouse 42 at the Greenpoint Terminal. It's his last major lifeline. Without it, the Bratva has no teeth. The capos leaned in, their skepticism warring with their greed. Even if that's true, Lorenzo said, it's a fortress. We go in there. It's a bloodbath. We aren't going in there, Camille said, a slow, venomous smile spreading across her lips. We are going to make Victor invite us in. And then we are going to burn it to the ground. How? Matteo challenged. Victor wants a trophy to prove he defeated Dominic, Camille explained, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial, lethal whisper. And right now, the biggest trophy in New York is me. We are going to send a message to Victor's lieutenants. We tell them that the Salvatore Syndicate is fracturing. We tell them that Dominic is dead and that the capos are willing to hand over Dominic's widow me in exchange for peace and the preservation of your territories. Silence descended on the room, absolute and profound. Silas stiffened behind her, clearly unhappy with the plan. You want to serve yourself up as bait? Lorenzo asked, genuinely stunned. If Victor gets you, he will torture you on a live feed just to break the family's morale. He won't get me, Camille said coldly, because when I walk into that warehouse tomorrow night to be surrendered, I won't be alone. The cargo containers scheduled to be shipped out of Greenpoint tomorrow afternoon. Buy off the dock workers. Empty the containers. Fill them with 50 of our most heavily armed men. When Victor steps out to claim his prize, we unleash hell from the inside out. The audacity of the plan left the hardened criminals speechless. It was a Trojan horse maneuver. Brilliant, suicidal, and utterly ruthless. It was exactly the kind of strategy Dominic would have orchestrated. Lorenzo looked at the young woman standing at the head of the table. He didn't see a frightened bride anymore. He saw the cold, calculating intelligence of a true mafia donna. And if it fails? Matteo asked quietly. It won't, Camille said, closing the ledger with a definitive snap. Because if it fails, I die. And I have absolutely no intention of dying. Silas, get the men ready. Lorenzo, make the call to the Russians. Tell them the Queen is ready to be dethroned. The rain over the Greenpoint Terminal was a relentless, freezing downpour, turning the concrete docks into slick, treacherous mirrors, reflecting the amber glow of the high-pressure sodium lights. Warehouse 42 loomed in the darkness, a massive corrugated steel beast surrounded by towering stacks of shipping containers. Camille stood entirely alone in the center of the loading bay. She wore a long, black cashmere trench coat, her hands shoved deep into her pockets to hide their violent trembling. The sheer terror of the moment threatened to crush her lungs. If her intel was wrong, if the dock workers had tipped off the Russians, she was standing in her own graveyard. A heavy metal door groaned open at the... Then, from the shadows, Victor Sokolov, emerged. He was a hulking, brutally scarred man, his blonde hair cropped close to his skull, his eyes alight with manic, predatory triumph. He walked slowly toward her, his heavy combat boots splashing in the puddles. Well, 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 Victor sneered, his thick Russian accent carrying over the sound of the rain. The beautiful Bianchi bird, clipped and caged. I must admit, I am disappointed. I expected Dominic to put up a better fight before he died. Dominic isn't dead, Camille said, her voice projecting with startling clarity, betraying none of her internal panic. Victor laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Your capos sold you out for a scrap of territory, little bird. Lorenzo practically begged me to take you. It is over. The Salvatore Empire belongs to the Bratva now. He stopped 10 feet from her, drawing a heavy silver revolver from his waistband. Get on your knees. Let's see how pretty you look. Begging. Camille didn't move. She tilted her head slightly, the rain plastering her dark hair to her cheek. She looked up at the towering stacks of shipping containers that formed a steel canyon around the loading bay. I don't beg, Camille said softly. I dictate. She pulled her right hand from her coat pocket. In her grasp was a simple, high-frequency radio detonator. Victor's smile vanished. What is that? Checkmate, Camille whispered. She pressed the button. The sequence was instantaneous and deafening. Small, shaped charges blew the heavy locking mechanisms off the doors of a dozen shipping containers simultaneously. The massive steel doors swung open, crashing against the sides of the boxes. From the pitch-black interiors of the containers, the Salvatore Syndicate poured out. 50 heavily armed men, led by Silas, erupted from the darkness, their weapons blazing. The trap was sprung with absolute, surgical precision. Victor's men, caught completely out in the open and expecting a peaceful surrender, were cut down in seconds. The loading bay turned into a slaughterhouse, the sound of gunfire drowning out the torrential rain. Victor screamed in rage, raising his revolver toward Camille. Before he could pull the trigger, a single, booming shot echoed from the catwalk directly above them. Victor froze. A dark, perfectly round hole appeared in the center of his forehead. His eyes rolled back, and the massive Russian crumpled to the wet concrete like a felled oak tree, dead before he even hit the ground. Camille gasped, looking up through the rain. Standing on the rusted iron catwalk, holding a smoking, long-barreled sniper rifle with his one good arm, was Dominic. He was pale, his left arm bound tightly in a black sling, the dark circles under his eyes, a testament to the agony he was currently enduring. But the aura of absolute, terrifying power that radiated from him was completely undiminished. The king had not fallen. He had simply been waiting in the shadows. The gunfire ceased as quickly as it had begun. The remaining Bratva soldiers surrendered, dropping their weapons into the puddles. Silas and the Salvatore men moved in, securing the area. Dominic slowly descended the metal stairs of the catwalk, his dark eyes never leaving Camille. The capos, including Lorenzo and Matteo, emerged from the shadows, watching in awe as the man they thought dead walked through the carnage of their enemies. Dominic stopped in front of Camille. He looked down at Victor's body, then up at his wife, the black trench coat, the rain, the absolute lack of fear in her eyes. She had outplayed the entire city. I thought I told you to stay out of trouble, Dominic murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that sent a shiver down her spine. You told me to be the queen, Camille countered, stepping closer to him, uncaring of the blood and the rain, and the watching eyes of their violent world. I was simply protecting my kingdom. Dominic reached out with his uninjured hand, his long calloused fingers wrapping around the back of her neck, pulling her flush against his chest. The kiss was not gentle. It was possessive, bruising, a violent collision of shared darkness and absolute victory. It was the sealing of a true blood vow. When he finally pulled away, he rested his forehead against hers, the chaotic symphony of sirens wailing in the far distance. You tricked my capos. You manipulated the Russians. You orchestrated a massacre Dominic listed softly, a dark, immensely proud smirk playing on his lips. "You are terrifying, Mrs. Salvatore." Camille looked up at the monster she had married, the monster she had saved, and the monster she had willingly become. The golden cage had finally swung open, and she had realized she had no desire to fly away. She ruled the sky now. "I learned from the best," Camille whispered back. Dominic turned to his men, his arm wrapped securely around his wife's waist, presenting her not as a captive, but as his absolute equal. The syndicate was whole. The Bratva was ash. "Burn the warehouse," Dominic ordered Silas, his voice echoing over the rain-slicked docks. He looked back down at Camille, the possessive fire in his eyes burning brighter than ever. "Let's go home, Donna. We have an empire to run." Do you love a mafia romance where the heroine doesn't just survive the darkness but learns to rule it? If this story of betrayal, deadly traps, and enemies to lovers tension kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you think Camille's next move should be. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow dark romance addicts and subscribe for more thrilling, pulse-pounding stories where power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Let's build this empire together.